أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا ومن سيئات اعمالنا واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله اما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Brothers and sisters, before getting into the theme of the Khutbah today, I asked before the beginning of every Khutbah, that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve our brothers and sisters throughout this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who may be suffering or in misery or pain. Whether we know the cause of that suffering, misery, or pain or not. But there's some suffering and there's some misery that every Muslim who is alive today, if they have any source of information outside of where they actually live, that every Muslim on the planet today would have to know something about the suffering of the people of Gaza, of Palestine. That there's been a 75-year suffering that has been going on with the illegal occupation, the settler colonialist Zionist state of Israel, occupying and then subjugating the indigenous people of the land of Palestine. It's been going on for 75 years. But in the last few months, we have witnessed a kind of suffering that we haven't seen in that part of the world and perhaps in any part of the world in over a half a century or more. Brothers and sisters, it was somewhat encouraging when the International Criminal Court said that the leader of the state, the Zionist state of Israel, could have an arrest warrant issued for him, and that anywhere within 143 countries on earth, that if he is found in any of these 143 countries, that he would be arrested. That's one of the few lights that we've seen coming from the situation over the last few months. Brothers and sisters, when we look at the suffering of the Muslims around the world, and I'm sorry if I sound like a stuck record, a stuck recording, saying the same thing over and over again. But as long as certain conditions continue to exist, I will continue to mention these conditions. And one of these conditions are the people, the Muslim people from Rakhine State in Myanmar, formerly Burma. That this is one of the most persecuted and unwanted minorities on the face of the earth. That they have been driven out of their country. They've been put in boats and unseaworthy ships. And many of them, of this population, are just sailing around in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. And there are many Muslim majority countries that are turning them away. No, you can't land here. They're being pushed from almost all of the nations in the world. Bangladesh has taken in so many, but those on those ships are capsizing in the sea, in the ocean. They're being abused by these folks who have put them on these ships with their thinking that they were going to safety. Let us remember our brothers and sisters. No matter where that suffering may be, the cause of that suffering, whether we know the details of that suffering or not, let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve the suffering of the brothers and sisters of this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not just something that's coming from the member. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us, those of us who say we believe, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kunu qawmina bil qisti shuhada lillahi, O ye who believe, stand out firmly for justice. And many tafsirs say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding this ummah to be standard bearers for justice. Don't just stand out and just hold a sign, but collectively we are to be the standard bearers that the rest of the earth would look to for how do you implement justice within a society. Brothers and sisters, I want hold you long today, and I want to remind myself and remind you of something that we all know. That oftentimes as parents, as grandparents, as uncles, and aunts, sometimes there are some very basic elements about the continuation of Islam throughout the generations. And sometimes we overlook certain things about how is it that we will have Islam in the hearts and the minds of our generations coming behind us. How will they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How will they love the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam if you and I neglect very essential components of keeping, perpetuating the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the love of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hearts and minds, not just of ourselves, but those generations, whether in our own families or others. How are we going to keep the fire burning hot for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Brothers and sisters, for a few moments, I want to remind myself and remind you, oftentimes of the very neglected aspect of the education and the inspiration that we give to our young people. And what I'm making reference to is how sometimes you and I can present this Deen al-Haq as if it's something that is just a man thing and just the sisters are just around to just support the Islamic work and the Islamic efforts of the men. And I know how many times over the years some young girl has come up to me in this mosque after maybe teaching a class or whatever it may be and say, Imam Khalid, it seems like Islam, that the only people who did anything really significant for the cause of Islam were men. That's all you talk about. You talk about these scholars. You talk about these men, mujahideen. What about the sisters? And I have to ask myself, how is it that our young girls can love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and love Islam if we don't put in front of them those examples of Muslim sisters and the role that they played in the development of this deen? Let me give you an example from the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There were some of the Sahabiyat, some of the Muslim sisters at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and amongst their group, they're just like our sisters today. Some of them would be more vocal. Some of them would be not less shy, that they wouldn't be afraid to come to the Prophet Muhammad SAW and ask him questions. On this particular occasion, after the Prophet Muhammad SAW had been teaching the believers, brothers and sisters, about this deed, a sister approached the Prophet Muhammad SAW and said that, I'm hearing, I believe everything that you're saying, but what about us? What about the sisters of this ummah? You have days and days and days when you're talking to the brothers and they're getting so much knowledge and they may come home and teach us what you're saying to them, but what about us? What particular attention are we getting? You're giving all of this attention to the brothers. What about us? And the Prophet ﷺ did not rebuke the sister. He did not say, what are you talking about, sister? He recognized that it was a necessity for him to spend time, devote time answering the specific questions of the sisters, informing them about those things that were unique to them as Muslim sisters, as Muslim women. Brothers and sisters, perhaps most of us in this room, if we were asked the question, who were the 10 people, actually 10 men, who were promised Jannah at one time, in one setting? It wasn't like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ over a long period of time was saying, this is a woman of Jannah. That is a woman of Jannah. That is a brother. That is a sister of Jannah. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as you and I know, the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 most rewarded people from the Sahaba, got at one time, 10 got the glad tidings that you are going to be in paradise. There were many more that during the course of the prophetic history of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that he told of the men that on this occasion, it was 10, you all have the glorious promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're going to get the Jannah. And most of us, most of the children who are studying Islam can tell us the names of those 10 who were promised Jannah. If you and I don't know it, we need to go and study it so that we can teach it to our children, that we can pass on the kind of information that any human being, any believer would just cherish to know. Not so they could just sit down and do nothing else, but they would just cherish. They would do anything to have the glad tidings from the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that you're going to paradise. But what about the women? What about the Muslim sisters? If we know those 10, what 3, what 1 name of a Sahabiyah at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, what name do we know of a Muslim girl, a Muslim sister that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said that you are going to be one of the sisters in paradise? Brothers and sisters, you and I know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had informed his beloved wife Khadijah that she not only was going to be a sister of paradise, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent greetings to you from the angel Jibreel. But the angel Jibreel came to give and share revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But before he left my presence, he said, Allah wants you to give salams to Khadijah. This is one of those sisters who's guaranteed paradise. What would our girls think about it? What would these children, these female girls, when they know the stories, like the story of Khadijah, how much more can it inspire them? We have to be inspired by just reading the Quran and the prophetic literature, but how much more could we be inspired by reading about the sisters, those who endured so much, those who knew so much about this deen, those who sacrificed so much, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guaranteed during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu that these people, these sisters, will be in paradise. Brothers and sisters, every one of us know about the beloved wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu Aisha bint Abu Bakr. We know her story. And so if you don't know it, shame on me, shame on you, if we don't know her story. Read this sister, this mother of the believer's story. Read her story. Read about her family. Read about her sister Asma. Read about the sacrifices that the sisters at the time for the Prophet Muhammad made during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, and then we're guaranteed that you will be in Jannah. Read about Fatima bint Muhammad. Read about the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, the sacrifices that she made, the knowledge that she had of Islam. There's a story from the Sirah literature that the Prophet Muhammad was sitting, that Fatima was sitting beside him. And it was close to the end of his life. And the Prophet Muhammad was speaking to the Muslims and saying things to them that Abu Bakr and others understood that he's saying he's not going to be with us much longer. And we start to cry. And Fatima was one of those sitting beside her father when he was talking like that. And she started crying. She understood that my beloved father, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is about to bring him back to himself. He's not going to be with us, not going to be with me any longer, much longer. And when she started to cry, the Prophet Muhammad leaned over to her and whispered something into her ears. And after he whispered in her ears, she began to smile. She began to laugh. She was so joyful that her father had consoled her with words that uplifted her spirit, and she wasn't depressed anymore. Later, we find out after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, when Fatima was asked, what was it? We all saw you sitting there crying. And the Prophet Muhammad whispered something to you. We couldn't hear it. What did he tell you? And Fatima related that he said that out of all of my family, out of all of this ummah close to me, you'll be the first one to join me. You will be the first of those after my death to die. And we'll return to Allah almost like we're coming at the same time. And so this was something because of her iman. It wasn't a sadness that she felt, oh no, tell me I'm going to live another 30 years. Oh no, don't tell me that you're about to die and I'm coming right behind you. She was joyful. This was blessed news. And it was because the iman that she had in her heart, the example that was set to her, everything about her was consistent with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have all of us as Muslims aspire for and to become. Brothers and sisters, we can go on and on, but in the interest of time, I'll just maybe mention just a couple of the sisters. And this one I think is more common. And we know the story of Sumayya bint Khayyat. We know the story about Sumayya. We know that in the early days of the revelation of the Quran and the mission of the Prophet Muhammad that it was very extreme and intense persecution in those early days there in Mecca. And we know that many of the disbelievers, like Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl and others, were just vicious and mean in the way even Omar ibn al-Khattab, before he embraced Islam, before Allah guided him to Islam, he was one of the greatest tormentors, beating up the Muslim men, striking his own sister. He was terrible before Allah, against the Muslims before Allah guided him. But here we have a sister who, along with her husband, were in the lowest strata of Meccan society. There were very few people before Islam that would look to them and see any value in them because of the role that they were playing in society. Call it slaves, call it servants. But because of their role, they had no status in Arabian society. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided her husband to Islam, and this sister embraced Islam. And because of her courageous stand, not rejected, even after being tortured and persecuted, physically tortured, physically persecuted, and she refused to turn away from this faith. And Sumayya became the first martyr for Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. It wasn't a brother out on the battlefield, it was a sister who was literally tortured to death. And the Ummah was so weak at this particular time that the Prophet Muhammad could do nothing when Ammar, her husband, when she was being tortured. All he could do, because Islam was so weak, was to stand there, stand in the area, and just tell them, be patient. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a great, tremendous reward for you. Just be patient. And this is what Sumayya endured. One of the worst forms of torture and murder that a female, a human being could ever endure. Brothers and sisters, we know about the story and that in the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. I just want to point out this one other person. And we know the story of Miriam, Isa, the mother of Isa. And we know how Miriam bint Imran, how righteous and devoted she was, how pure she was in her behavior. Even before Isa was born, read Surah Imran, read the Quran, read the Hadith literature, and we see that this was a sister that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected her and guided her through her young life in order to play the role that she did as the mother of Isa alayhi salam. This is another. The Prophet Muhammad said that she would be in the highest of ranks of in paradise, in Jannah. But the mother of Isa is another sister who was a true believer, who withstood all kinds of slander, slandering her name and reputation. That she withstood all of this, peaceability. All praises to Allah. We praise Him and seek His assistance against the evils of our minds and against the unsuccessfulness of our actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, no one can lead astray. And whomsoever Allah causes to act to err as a result of his or her own actions, no one can lead aright. O Allah, help those who help the religion of Muhammad and count amongst them. O Allah, disappoint those who try to disgrace the religion of Muhammad and do not make us of those. Brothers and sisters, we're doing our sisters a disservice if we don't emphasize within our homes, emphasize to your wives, emphasize to your older daughters or to your young daughters emphasize to them the responsibility, the need that they have to learn about the total ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not just at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but learn about the glorious contributions that our sisters have made. You know, oftentimes, depending upon what background we come from in this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and oftentimes we find that the phenomena of having sisters in the masjid is something that's not even allowed in certain Muslim majority countries. I was in and I won't call the name of the country, but I was in the National Mosque a number of years ago for this particular Muslim majority country. And because being the father of daughters and having sisters, and so naturally I'm looking around and just thinking, well, where are the facilities for the sisters? Because this is a big, nice, huge mosque. But as the brother was showing me around, I had to ask him the question, where's the facility for the sisters? He said, well, there are no facilities. I said, well, why is that? Sisters aren't allowed to come to the mosque. Well, how do we expect our sisters to learn about this deen if they're not even allowed to come to the mosque? Does it mean that we have shaktas in every one of our households who are able to transfer the information? The Prophet Muhammad had even instructed for Salat al-Fajr when it's dark. He told the Sahaba, don't forbid the women slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for even coming to the masjid at Salat al-Fajr. So what sunnah do we follow? What example are we following when we create institutions called masjids, called Islamic centers, and we put their position in such a secondary, third-class kind of citizenship? I'm not talking about violating any of the rules of Islam. I'm not talking about violating the sunnah. I'm talking about, to the best of our ability, following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our girls, our daughters, go off to college and achieve exceptional things in so many different disciplines of education and other aspects of just professional life and other life, playing very responsible roles in the community. And they go to some of our most prestigious universities. And what all of us who go to any university for the most part in this country, we're indoctrinated with the philosophy and the understanding that Muslim civilization and every other civilization is secondary to Western civilization. That everything about the West is superior to anything that those big camel riding people and others, what they're doing in the world today. And so I think if your daughters, my daughters, our grandchildren, the youth in Community Mosque Academy come here and at some point they don't learn the names and the stories, these young girls, the stories of these sisters. If they don't know the name of Fatima al-Fariya, Fatima al-Fariya was the founder of the first known university in the world. It started out as a madrasa, just teaching children the Quran, teaching children hadith and the Syriac literature. But this sister went a step beyond that of just having a school. And so through her work and the dedicated work of other brothers and sisters, the date, I think it was 1809, I think it was. Sorry, I can't remember the date, but it was in the early 9th century. I think it was 1809. It's 1809, 1829. She is credited, a Muslim sister, with establishing the first university in the world. So this is our legacy. These are the examples that we have in the past. We have examples in the present today that will achieve even greater things because of the technology and everything else that's available. So I'm not saying by no means don't educate our young men, our boys. We definitely have to do that. But by the same token, let's use every resource that we can to provide the sisters, the young sisters, the older sisters, examples that can inspire them. Some sisters can't aspire to be Khalid ibn Walid. They can be inspired to be Nusayba, who stood over the Prophet Muhammad when he was knocked down in a ditch at a hood and helped beat off the pagans who were trying to kill him. Was defended, one of his defenders of Islam was a Muslim sister. And we have these examples throughout the Sirah literature and throughout the history of Islam. Do it for Allah, give us an understanding of this deen that is useful for us in this world and in the next. For Allah, strengthen our resolve to do that which is pleasing to you and pleasing to you only. Amen. Oh Allah, make not this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad a test for the disbelieving people. Brothers and sisters, just a couple of quick announcements. We're starting a new cycle in